Mission Possible, where we explore the frontiers beyond individual scale. I'm Anne Braithwaite, a systems navigator, and I'm fascinated by the potential hiding within our systems. Unleashing that potential is the secret, I believe, to tackling our biggest challenges that are too vast for any solo hero to take on alone. Each week, I'm speaking with visionaries who've discovered that our greatest resource doesn't lie in individual brilliance, rather, it's the incredible capacity that exists between us all. Join us as we discover how to tap that potential by working beyond boundaries, beyond individual scale. This season, we're focused on the natural hazard sector, and living in New Zealand, it's a sector dear to my heart. After all, this is one of the most hazard-prone countries on the planet.
In today's episode, I've got the absolute pleasure of chatting with Michael Nolan. Michael and I met at the Disaster and Emergency Management Conference in Australia's Gold Coast, where I was speaking last June. And we hit it off on meeting of the minds about some of the things that were really pressing challenges in this sector. Michael currently leads the climate change risk and resilient practice at Aurecon. So without further ado, here's my chat with Michael. Michael Nolan, welcome to Mission Possible podcast. It's great to have you with us, and I'm really excited that you've been able to join us. We had a bit of a rocky start finding each other and getting here, but we made it, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Could you perhaps just give us a few words about yourself and give our listeners a bit of your background? It would be great.
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Anne. My background's 30 years in climate change and sustainability, and a good 20 years of that is in the climate adaptation, climate resilience space. But I have worked across resilience in broader context. I've done everything from assess airports in the northern Canada falling through the permafrost due to global warming. I've worked with Indigenous peoples around the world on impact on both natural and urban environments, and I've worked with all levels of government and global corporations on incorporating climate change into their planning, investments, managing infrastructure. So there's never a dull moment. There's lots of things happening.
Yeah. And what's your current focus, Michael?
So the work with infrastructure, and particularly of recent times, I've helped the United Nations look at a resilient infrastructure scorecard and a way to support increasing the resilience of our infrastructure systems that underpin both our urban environments, our cities, as well as major industry. And so there's with that comes a focus on the investor as well, how to ensure that the money that's being invested can manage the risk of a changing climate with all the physical impacts.
Yeah, so quite a straightforward problem to get your head around then.
Yes, it's certainly picked up pace from 20 years ago when we did the first climate risk assessment to infrastructure globally, and it was people didn't really perceive how much of an impact we were expecting, and the levels of risks and the impacts to the economy, and it really sort of blossomed a range of practice and how to incorporate these elements, where before that it was just thinking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but people didn't necessarily get what would be, why we're doing it, what are the impacts, and so we were able to make that very clear that the risks were significant and affected all elements of the economy.
It sounds like things are shifting, Michael. With your longevity in the field, perhaps if we start with what practices or beliefs do you think dominate the field? Perhaps you might take us back a little, or even just what do you think is dominating the field today?
Yeah, so it emerged that there was 2005 to 2015, a focus on identifying the risks and understanding different mechanisms to build resilience, but most of the focus was on understanding the risk and what it meant to communities. What was the level of vulnerability or ability to adapt? That was all really useful, but there wasn't a large amount of implementation of things that could build resilience. And so we'd worked on a lot of economic analysis to determine the costs and benefits of adapting and when. And the when aspect was by far the most important element. You don't want to spend or waste money too soon, and you don't want to be too late because it's more expensive. And so as the impacts of climate change have increased, particularly over the last decade, we're seeing, say, a whole range of our global clients that are globally exposed because they have sites all over the world. They've seen a 20% increase in financial losses from neutral weather type events. That increase over time is quite profound because it's very similar to a lot of them, and that is an indicator. For one organisation, it was an extra 300 million a year that they're making a loss of profit. It's that sort of scale, and when you look at across all the different businesses, that's a large amount of money. That's additional cost and impact above what was traditional impact from weather variability. So with that comes then a greater focus of, well, it's actually worth investing because we know that we can reduce those losses. We can invest in a range of activities that better manage our sites, early warning systems, ways to incorporate it into the core strategy of the business where there's opportunities. We've had businesses that have gone from about 20% of their profit being climate prepared strategies, where they say looking at better areas for planting and climatic conditions for new crops, orchards, different sorts of species, and building that into their business plan and developing the right type of species to thrive in these changing climates. That's become a large part of their profit. But they're also seeing in 10 years' time, it's going to be at least 50% of their profit. And the ability of organisations to anticipate the changes and adapt accordingly is big business. And so it's sort of how do you incorporate, translate the climate science into core decision making at a business level, but also for government, how do you adapt over time depending on your policy objectives and the requirements that you're trying to deliver through your functions and services.
Michael, thank you. Just an awful lot in there. A couple of things that stood out for me was that the loss of profit, I think you talked about 20% increase in those losses, and then you're saying equally a 20% increase in profit when we get it right, with the potential for 50% profit. So this just talks, these numbers are really, really tangible for people to get a grip on. All in there was though the when. Two things, the when of doing it and also getting the knowledge or the expertise more distributed across the system. Many of the areas I've worked in, everything from medical science research to natural hazards, there tends to be a gap between the science and it getting usable and then used if we use the Sendai framework, right? So getting it across that lag gap. What have you noticed? What are you seeing that's shifting in that field? How are they evolving? Are we breaking that? Are we getting the science to the decision makers, whether they be corporates or government or just individuals at home?
The most recent strong driver in the last 5 years has been easily the financial disclosures, because there's a need to bring it into the decision making with the financial controllers in any organisation. And because this isn't just an issue for, say, the enterprise risk or the corporate risk function or the sustainability, climate change, environment function, it's actually a combination of a whole range of both core strategy, finance, reporting, all of those things coming together lifts it into that core strategy, where before it was sort of less on the radar at the executive leadership level, where it was like, yeah, we know it's happening, but what's it got to do with us? The ability to translate that into these disclosures to understand the risks they have, but also what are some sensible, practical things they can do to manage that risk and avoid losses. At the same time, what is their future position in the market? How do they leverage this understanding? Because it will affect not just them, it'll affect their competitors, it'll affect the locations where they have a lot of their operations, assets, offices or jurisdictions. And so there's it's definitely moved with that financial disclosure requirement, and we've had a big uplift in supporting the understanding of the risk across portfolios of assets, but to bring that up into the corporate, so what, and what are how to justify the types of investments that will make the difference.
Thanks, Michael. Thinking of real practical examples of that, you were speaking earlier about agriculture, where we plant, how we plant, when we plant, but even more widely in large infrastructure. What practices and approaches have evolved? Where are good examples of this working, where people have made really hard decisions to divest, reinvest, change their approaches altogether so that we're ready for the future?
Yeah, so I can't talk to the names of the businesses, but
Absolutely.
firsthand, we've seen a lot of investment divestment decisions moving away from certain exposed sites, say in the mining resources sector, where they've had continual impact and it's affected profit significantly. And they've just said, well, we're going to sell this site. It's not worth it. And then you get where they've doubled down and invested and protected those sites that have had a series of impacts. And it's some of the investment is absolutely infrastructure, flood protection, reducing the potential for dam failure with increased extreme rainfall events, those sorts of things, which there's thankfully really good requirements across the whole resources sector on managing that to incorporate climate change. But you have also investments in people building their understanding, capability, the types of protocols of how they respond when a cyclone's on its way, where before you'd be a bit, they usually miss us, or we're not too bad.
Well, that's
Fingers crossed. And that's people are stoic and deal with what may come, but there's a whole range of things you can do beforehand that substantially minimise your risk of harm to people, and let alone to be able to restart operations effectively and get product to market. So there's a full spectrum of things that can be done for sure. But agriculture, absolutely on the front end. They've seen the changes and they know they need to do production elsewhere. Dairy was an early mover to start looking at the implications for rainfall and water supply for dairy, and have picked, in this case, this part of the world, picking areas further south is a safer bet for security of water supply. And so there's a whole range of early movers, and then you've got the way that major infrastructure players like water supply and sewer have now starting to plan out moving sewer assets away from the coast, or because naturally they're all there because that's water flows downhill to sea level, and so they always had it pretty close to the ocean. But sea level rise, increase in storm surge, and if you're unlucky enough to have subsidence or you're in a seismic prone area, there's a whole range of compounding issues, and you basically can't run a city without good sewer.
No,
so there's a range of
quite quickly, don't
implications for sure.
Yeah. Michael, we're seeing a lot more of these cascading effects. So I think you see compounding effects, cascading events, where event upon event upon event, and the compounding issues, which I think starts to provide a different layer to our thinking. My experience, limited as it is in relation to yours, is people understanding risks kind of as separate things, a bit like doctors looking at your body and going, I'm a heart specialist or I'm a lung specialist. Actually, we need to look at the totality, right? So what are you noticing from the cascading or compounding effects of different events, perhaps on one site?
That's always been what reaches a high threshold in a disaster type event, where you get these compounding multiple failures, but you also get this cascading flow-on effect. And so what's emerging now is a stronger focus on those interdependencies, because they usually are not well understood by the individual actors. And so, again, we use this UN Resilient Infrastructure scorecard and assess Sydney and across all the different infrastructure, including waste and the government policy context that sits with it. And it highlighted some areas of significant weakness or areas of greater attention. And so we brought together all the different players from each of those infrastructure elements together and work through how do you better share data, how do you anticipate what you're dependent on from each other. And there's a lot further they need to go. So an example, rail line down from a flood event, you think, okay, that happens. Unfortunately, that was the rail line that took all the waste from Sydney out to a regional area to be dealt with. Rail line was down for in excess of a week, and all of Sydney's waste piled up. And it's this whole range of other broader implications that come with that. And there just wasn't another mechanism. There was no built-in redundancy to the system. They just thought, it'll be fine. So it can be weird and wonderful the ways these cascading interdependencies sit. By far, energy and data telecommunications are at the top of that, and then transport, and then water, and there's a whole range of requirements to sustain communities and business. So how do you get better at understanding these? So we've assessed a whole range of different sites, businesses, for their value chain resilience, and how to consider up and downstream the implications of certain hazards. And there's a range of resilience interventions or enablers that really help connect that system or network, or those that are interdependent on each other, to better understand where they sit in that string, and that they're literally only as strong as the weakest chain. And what are some things that they can do to uplift or support each other, or find those things that are of value to the infrastructure system, not just the individual infrastructure player.
So, Michael,
and it's new investment.
Are you noticing a shift in that with partners coming or individuals coming together? Classically, we see silos all over the place, and it's hard to even get people in a room to have a conversation like this. What are you noticing around that? Are there any shifts happening? Are we got still classic, well, you fix yours and I'll fix mine and we'll all be right? Or are you seeing a shift in that? What's working, what's not?
I've been fortunate to be on the front end of a lot of the new ways of doing partnering to manage these things. I had 4 years leading a United Nations initiative around supporting partnerships between private sector and government, particularly local and regional government, around critical issues that government couldn't deal with by itself. We would work with the governments to identify what were these critical things that they just were really struggling with, and there's no way that they could address them in isolation. And so then we'd pick the slithers of the private sector through the UN Global Compact, sort of like a business associations in the different regions, and find the right slithers of the private sector that were relevant to that particular issue, that could have a direct business benefit. There could be a potential revenue stream. There could be sustaining a range of value. It could be that they have the right data and they're keen to share to address this particular issue, or it may relate directly to their product or service. And so finding and tying those things together, there's a process of building trust and exploration, but it has to eventually you find 2 or 3 concepts that have merit as initiatives or things that can be done, and then you really test it between those parties to see how could it actually be worth even more. What's that value, and to who, and how can we enhance the concept? And you end up, out of the concepts, you land on one that's really worth the effort to collaborate, because it takes more energy, and there's complexity and working through the right opportunity, and to manage governance at the same time. So it's not private sector in the pocket of government, or vice versa. You really work through that governance process at the same time, but you accelerate something that can be invested in or can self-sustain the impact. And we were working with 120 cities around the world doing this, and it just really picked up a fitness and a process of how to do this well. And so since then, I've been at Aurecon for 4 years, also applying that with our clients. And so we've been forming some really good collaborations, one between the Queensland Investment Corporation and the Port of Brisbane. Traditionally, there's been issues that fall outside the boundary of an asset or an operation, and everyone always focuses on what can you control within the boundary of your site. That's natural. That's what makes for good business and operations. There's things that sometimes just outside your boundary that that have been causing significant issues, and there's a need to collaborate to deal with that jointly, because there's shared risk and there's also a shared opportunity to improve the situation and reduce impact to operations and profit and safety. Finding those collaborations and advancing those in a way that ensures we'll get a really good outcome. And we've been quite successful at forming a number of these collaborations. The trick is, yes, it has to be a good concept and something that actually dealing with a real problem that isn't going away, it's getting worse, but it also has to find the right people. There's a trust element, there's a human interaction, personal commitment element that if you don't see it, you don't bother.
Yes.
And you can work that out pretty quickly when you get a number of people in the room and you start to shape together what would be a powerful collaboration of the right people. And it moves mountains, amazing stuff, but it's also quite fulfilling for the people involved.
Yeah. Of course, Michael, I'll agree with all of that, given my background and focus on collaboration. Yes, the right people in the room, and yet it will always get hard at some point. There will always be moments where you go, well, we hadn't foreseen that, or one party for some reason can't continue and so forth. Any tips and tricks for people getting involved in these kind of collaborations of how you keep, if my analogy is the train on the tracks, when it might otherwise be derailed by hard stuff coming from left field, or really when you get to the real nitty-gritty of, well, when I signed up for this, I wasn't sure I was signing up for that. So what have you got to share with us on that front?
Yeah, so I'd say the ability to innovate, and like a pressure cooker, you just, there's a healthy level of persistence that goes with it, but it's the sense of the health of the partnership is something important, and it's important to do a health check of it periodically, which has been part of a key to success. And there's a lot of good research that backs this up from World Bank and players that reaffirms you can't just think everything's going well and let it just flow, because that's when it's most likely to come off the rails. And so the ability to come back in, reaffirm, why is this worth collaborating? What stage are we at? Is there an issue with the final governance? Is it going to sit in which organisation? Is it going to be its own initiative eventually? Is it going to be something that just has a particular time frame that it's done? And determining and rechecking that is the key to insight of, do you need to innovate? Do you need to adjust? How can this continue to be valuable and achieve the impacts that we're all after?
Great. Thanks for that, Michael. That continuous rechecking for me has always been an important aspect of work. And I was wryly smiling when you said, when it feels like it's really going well, that's the most dangerous time. And my experience would also bear that out. So it's lovely to hear that from a different quarter. Perhaps switching gears a bit, Michael, I'm wondering about emerging tech methodologies, things like AI and so forth, that obviously are very much on our radar these days. What are you seeing that maybe excites you about how things might be shifting? Potential is for some of these things for us?
Yeah, but for AI, we've been playing with that with regards to the reviewing of large sets of risk data. You go into some organisations or for a state or at a national level, and you've got so many risks identified that are climate related or weather related or whatever through a whole range of organisations right down to local government, and people to draw out and understand the trends in the change in risk, the types of hazards that most organisations, different regions are most exposed to, where hotspots and pinch points across the landscape. The use of AI has been really good in terms of the way that we can interrogate what was originally a too hard basket, where people would say, there's just too much there, when, don't waste your time. Within a very short period of time, and we're talking 2-3 days, with the right inquiry, we can draw out significant information, trends and insights that support better scoping, development of programs and initiatives that can be more effective, because it understands what sits out there in, if you like, a big data set. So AI has been excellent in that perspective. The other technologies, early warning systems, like they're just very clear, those areas and industries that are using them and their reduction in losses and loss of life versus those where they're just underprepared. It was did a bit with Mayor Al from Cebu in San Francisco in Asia, near the Philippines, and he prepared his city for a typhoon type, and he really embraced the private sector and a whole range of players. What's their part to play to reduce the loss of life and the impact so that they could repair and get back on track after an event? And they had a massive event come through, and the next province over lost tens of thousands of lives, and they got the same level of impact and they lost 0 lives. And so that difference of the preparedness, early warning system, people knowing their part, how to collaborate, how to engage private sector so that they're active, not passive, really important. And it's sort of, so the technology that comes with that, how do you have things in place beforehand? And so I would see the methods for collaboration between government and private sector as a technology. If you're getting better at collaborating and communicating and sharing when it matters most, that's a powerful technology.
Absolutely. Michael, just a quick word for the listeners who aren't familiar with how an early warning system might work. It can seem a bit like magical fairy dust at times. Just give us an example of how that actually is together for those who may not be aware.
Yeah, so to give a resource development sector example, because it's pretty clear cut. So most people think, you can trust the weather forecast for a week at best. What we're been drawing out is sort of a 6-month ahead outlook up to 3 months, sort of trying to ensure that the businesses that we work with have an alert when say in this case an extreme fire condition season was coming, making sure they're well aware and to build that into the management of sites, reducing fuel load, all those sorts of things. So that's something we can understand 6 to 3 months in advance quite well. But the same with more extreme flooding season, and understand that that's going to hit particular regions where they've got sites. And so then having that awareness and heightened alert so that people on site understand when they do get that 1 week outlook and they think, oh, this actually looks like there's a really big potential for storm flooding event. The management of tailings dams to dewater and prepare for those sorts of events so that they don't overtop is a very clear response. In order for them to make the types of decisions in just a few days, sometimes isn't enough. Them having a 3 to 6 month outlook, they make different decisions leading up to it. Yeah. And it's this sort of preparedness prevents a significant failure and risk and reputation. It's part of it comes down to, there's great technology that'll give you senses of how your groundwater's changing, the conditions, if you like, the dryness of the fuel in the soil in your area for forest fire risk. There's even the heat wave aspect. Most people think, just the ambient temperature, it's getting to 35 or 40 degrees. But if you're near large bare areas of concrete, or even worse, if you're on a railway corridor full of basalt, the temperature can be an extra 20 degrees higher. So you're looking at 55 to 60 degrees. Wow. And so people, without using good technology, have no idea how exposed they are in certain locations and at heat stress and potential loss of life. So there's lots of things that can be built in both to prepare and understand the conditions at the time.
Michael, thanks for that. I'm sure we could keep talking for some time. I hear the passion in your voice and the wide-ranging areas that you've worked on across your career. I'd love to hear from you now in the nature of this podcast, which is Mission Possible. What might your moonshot idea be in this field that might seem impossible now, but pulling on those collaborations, pulling everyone together, getting the right minds together and the right willing together, that could be transformative in your view, that you would love to see happen?
I had a extended involvement with the Sustainable Development Goals with the UN over a number of years, helping to progress those. And there's 17 of them, and there's one, if you like, there's 3 that are missing. One is that there's nothing in there about outside of our atmosphere, so anything in related to satellites and beyond. There's nothing there that really pulls together UN Declaration for Rights of Indigenous Peoples and to really have a stronger one around Indigenous. But the third and final one, which would take it up to 20, is the Sustainable Development Goals, would be a financial mechanism that is very much aligned with what we've been working on for resilient investment, linked to an investor advisory board for the UN, and it's around disaster risk reduction. And it's sort of the ability to provide real incentive to the money that governments borrow. They take on debt. People buy that debt. Investors around the world will buy that debt, but that debt's actually a higher risk if that country and its economy and its people are less resilient. How do you support a range of investments in resilience that actually reduce the risk of that investment? And so it's not just debt, it's infrastructure bonds, which there's something like $15 trillion in infrastructure bonds out there, and every 10 years they need to be renewed. So in any 1 year, there's 1.5 trillion that could, and my moonshot would be that it would be considered in terms of the resilience, performance and future investments, and past investments would determine what's the health of resilience for that. The infrastructure that sits in all of these cities, there's a direct line between that and it's whether it's a greater risk and therefore the capital, the finance should be costed higher, or it's actually a safer bet and premium or the cost of that capital is less. And so having finance drive the management of better decisions to invest in resilience and to adapt to this extreme change in climate is going to be an absolutely important key to action and influence. And same with the Sustainable Development Goals. They're really important blueprint for managing a better planet and its people, but how do you enable it? And it needs a financial mechanism to be baked in, but it's also beneficial. If you play the game right, then we all profit.
Fantastic. Michael, thank you so much to absorb there. We're coming to the end of our time. I wondered if there's anything else you would like to leave listeners with that you're particularly passionate about that we haven't covered off so far.
I'd flag on in terms of how organisations volunteer to help with these increase in disaster events, and particularly private sector. Everyone knows the situation where you take the 2009 Black Saturday event in Victoria. A whole lot of corporates wanted to help, go out and buy 150 caravans and hire people to take the caravans out to give people housing. And they drove around for 2 weeks and I couldn't find anyone to give them to. They just actually got in the way because a lot of the areas were cordoned off because it just burnt down. And a lot of people go to family and friends after an event like that. And so it's not like they're all just standing there waiting to receive a caravan. So there's all this desire to help from private sector because we're part of the community too. We're people. There's a whole range of data, skills, capability that can be brought to bear. But unless it's coordinated up front and self-coordinated by private sector so we don't get in the way, but has to be connected with the main emergency management coordination. So we've been working through with our own organisation, how do we better coordinate our volunteerism and increase the impact of it and provide a whole range of data, insight and capability for managing infrastructure during a disaster, both in a very much a preparatory stage so that when it does occur, we can act quickly, but also in a coordinated fashion and support the response effectively if the right level of information they may need. An example is you get a bridge that's been hit by a flood. It hasn't failed, but they're unsure. And person from State Emergency Service or fiery or doesn't know anything about bridges in terms of making a call. Do we? Is this okay? And the agencies themselves that manage the transport assets flat chat during these types of events, and being able to have a resource that just provides quick insight on assets like bridges, coordinate off, or no, this is actually, this will be okay, but over the next 2 weeks, we're going to have to see how it consolidates and settles, and we may need to have an intervention then. And then when you take the intervention off, and if you need to actually use it for access to deal with other elements of the disaster, what risk are you taking? And it's all of these things can actually have professional input, but that organisations like ours are super keen to help. It's having that better coordination before an event is absolutely needed, and there's so many elements from the private sector that can and want to help. It just needs some clever governance to enable that and support. And so we're just trialling different ways of doing that, and there's a number of organisations that are playing too. And so it'll be really interesting how we go over this next year.
Well, Michael, wish you all the best with that. It's a very exciting initiative, and I'm really looking forward to how it turns out. Just remains for me to thank you for being here on the podcast today. It's been an absolute insightful and delightful conversation. Thank you. Well, I do hope you enjoyed that chat with Michael. I know it's really got my brain fizzing. And his Moonshot challenge for third or 20th, I think, even Sustainable Development Goal around infrastructure, I think leads us perfectly into our next section, Old Ways, New Ways. And what popped up for me on this was thinking all the way back to about 250 BCE and the Dujiangyan Irrigation System in China. And my apologies if my Chinese pronunciation is not quite up to scratch. This irrigation system was originally constructed around, as I say, 250 BCE in the state of Jin. And it's an irrigation and flood control project that unbelievably is still used today, even though it has faced down many natural hazard challenges over the years, not least of which was the 2008 Sichuan earthquake, which was a magnitude 7.9. Coming from New Zealand, I can tell you that's a real rock and roller and not to be taken lightly. The fact that it's still running today, it's maintained by the cooperation of both communities and government to make sure it's maintained, and they use modern and ancient means to do that. So integrating the old with the new. So what a perfect fit for this. So why did they build this irrigation system? Well, originally the Min River, which is a tributary of the Yangtze River, would rush down and then slow abruptly as it hit the Chengdu Plain, where quite often the watercourse will have filled up with silt, and then there was significant flooding in the region. A typical response to that in modern times would be to dam the river, take control of it, and have all sorts of high-tech Internet of Things monitoring systems sorting it out. Not so in ancient China, not least of which they didn't have the Internet of Things back then, but they did have a lot of smarts. And using natural flows and understanding how nature works and using gravity to their advantage, they actually divided the river into different tributaries and worked with nature rather than against it to regulate the control of the river in natural ways. What that means is silt still goes up and down the river, as do fish. Migration patterns of fish were not disrupted too much, and so the overall health of the system was maintained. The water management scheme is still in use today, and when I tell you that it serves over 5,300 square kilometres of land, maintaining their flood control, their irrigation, their water transport, and just general water consumption for over 50 million people, I think you'll be as surprised as I that a system that was built 2,500 years ago is still doing its job today. That for me is a remarkable example of sustainable infrastructure, and how magic would it be if we could harness that sort of thinking in today's terms and bring that to bear in service of Michael's new Sustainable Development Goal. I'm Anne Braithwaite. This is Mission Possible. I hope you've enjoyed the chat. We'll see you next time.